All right, another example, let's go through it and try to write some programs using both while loop and for loop. By now, of course, you can say I really like fruits, and you always see examples of fruits in my lectures. All right, so let's do it. So in this example, what I want to do is I want to see how many apples I have in the sequence, all right? And the sequence that I have here is a list, right? I simply want to know how many apples exist in this sequence. And I have a restriction. The restriction is that I cannot use count function, okay? Because if I could have used count function, it would have been very simple question. I simply would have said fruits dot count, and then I say what I'm looking for. I'm looking for apple. If you run it, it gives you 2, right? But the restriction here is you're not allowed to use count function. And basically, I want you to create something that work exactly same as this count function, okay? Or quite similar, because we haven't learned about functions yet, but later when we learn about function, I might ask you to create this count function and replicate that. All right, since I cannot use the count function, this is not a solution. I have a restriction, and I need to find another way to count the number of a certain item I have in a sequence, right? So now I'm thinking of, okay, to do that, I cannot simply just say, all right, fruit count, so that is out of the door. I cannot use that method. So what else can I do? All right. The other solution that comes to my mind is, all right, I can basically go and traverse over that sequence, look at each item, and compare it with the thing that I'm looking for. If I'm looking for apple, I take each item. I take, for instance, banana, I compare it to see if it's equal to apple. If it is equal to apple, then I just have a counter and I count it up. I go to the next item, compare it with apple. If they are same, I add to my counter. If they are not, I'm not adding anything to my counter. All right? To do that, then, I need to traverse over the sequence, all right? And we learned that if you want to traverse over something, or if you want to go and see each of the items that you have in a sequence, you can use a loop, right? We learned about 2 different types of loop. One is a while loop that you can basically use for any type of problems. So whatever the problem that you have, you always can use a while loop to write it. But for loop, you need to have a sequence. If you have a sequence or a definite loop, using a for loop becomes much simpler, okay? The logic behind it, everything is much simpler. But to show you, to prove to you for loop is simpler, I'm going to do this first using a while loop. And then after I do that, then I'm going to do the exact same thing, trying to count the number of apples I have in the sequence by for loop. All right, so let's just start our while loop. So I'm going to go with the keyword while, and then I need to set the condition. All right, so now it's time to come up with your condition. So for the condition, I want to go through each of the items until I get to the end of that list, all right? So for that, I need to know exactly how many items I have in that sequence. So one way to do it is you simply can use len function, all right? So you can say, what is the len of fruits? If I can type today, all right? So it exactly tells you how many items you have in a sequence using the len function. So I'm going to use this function to set my condition, all right? So I want to keep going until I get to that length, to that many, until I like repeat some instruction that many times, or in this example, for many times. So I'm going to create a variable, like a sort of a counter that helps me to count the numbers until I get to that variable, to that number. So I'm going to create this variable et for iterations, and I'm going to set it to 0. Okay. The reason that I started from 0 and now 1 is something that I'm going to talk about shortly. All right. Because I'm going to use this variable for something else as well, all right? And that is the reason that I started from 0 instead of starting it from 1, all right? And we get to that in a second. So et starts from 0, all right? And then now it's time to set the condition. I have a variable that I can use to increase it as I go in each iteration, and then I have my upper bound, which is the length of that sequence. Okay, so I'm going to say as long as this variable iteration is less than the length of the sequence fruits, just keep going. All right, and then before I forget, I'm going to increment my variable iterations. Okay. So simply what I'm doing here is I have initialized my variable et to 0, and then I'm saying as long as this variable is less than the length of the sequence, just keep going, add 1 to it, so the next time that I come and check this condition, my iteration is 1 more, okay? And as soon as et becomes 4, you stop. All right, to make sure this works, because if I run it as it is, I'm not going to see any output. To make sure this works, I want to print something to see if I have all the stuff that I wanted. So a good sign is this is not an infinite loop. That means at some point it stops. All right, so good for us. So next I'm going to just say, all right, so let's print something, see if we get all of the sort of the iteration numbers that we are looking for. So I expect to see 0 to 3, so 0, 1, 2, and 3, which are 4 items. All right, so let's see if we actually see that. So here you go. So the first item, the first time you get inside the while loop, your iteration variable is 0, and then you go all the way until your et becomes 4. When it's 4, then it is not anymore less than length of fruit, which is 4 as well. You do not print 4. Okay, so you go all the way 0 to 3. But in this example, I do not want to see the iteration number or index number in this example, and that is my answer to why I started this variable iteration from 0, because I also want to use that as index number. All right, and remember in Python, all of the sequences that we have, there are 0 index. That means the index number for your first item is 0. So if I want to access anything from my sequence, I need the index number for that. And I can use et basically to do that as the index number. So instead of printing the index number, or aside from index number, we can also print the actual value that is in that index number. All right, so how can we do it? Remember, with sequences, if you want to access something, to access an element in a sequence, we always use square bracket, and then in this square bracket you put the index number. So you have the name of your sequence. This is, I actually go to name of your sequence, and then you have brackets, and then inside bracket you have the index number. Okay, so here if I want to see the item that is in each of these index numbers, I need to have the name of my sequence first. What is the name of my sequence? Fruits, right? Fruits. And then I need to have a square brackets, and then inside the square bracket to access something, I need to have the index number. What index number I'm trying to access, all right? And here for index number, we use this variable et or it, okay? So let's run and see what we get. Okay, here you go. In index number 0, which I'm printing, you have item banana. In index number 1, you have apple, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you see, you're going about each of the items, you're traversing over that sequence and getting one item at a time and printing it. Okay, good. So, but again, our goal is not to print items. We are trying to count how many apples we have. Okay, so we want to see if an item is an apple. Okay, again, I'm going to repeat the last sentence that I said. We want to see if the item, if the item that we have is apple. If it's apple, we want to count it. Okay, if. So whenever you have if, that means you have a selection control. Okay, so I'm going to combine selection control with my loop. So I have the item, so this gives me the item, each item in each iteration. So I want to take with the string apple. If it is a string apple, I want to do something, okay? For now, I'm just going to say print it is an apple, okay? So simply, with the program that we have so far, you're going to see all of the items are going to be printed, and hopefully after each apple item, you're also going to get this, because that means your item is apple and it's going to be printed. This line is going to be printed. So let's run and see if that works. Here you go. Banana, it was not apple, so you just moved on to the next iteration. Item 1, you had apple, so this was true. You went inside this if, and you printed this line. Cherry was not equal to apple. You ignore, you skip this selection. You just went to the next iteration. The next iteration, you had an apple. Then you printed this line. Okay, I hope this makes sense, all right? So just do it a step by step so you understand what is going on with each of these instructions. All right, so I do not want to see any of these, of course. I just did them to make sure I'm doing it correctly. I'm accessing this stuff that I wanted to, all right? So I'm going to take this line out. I'm going to take this line out, and I'm going to replace this with something else, all right? So I'm going to create a variable count, and I'm going to set it to 0, okay? Because when we start, we do not have any apple. We haven't counted any apple yet, all right? So here, when we got to this line, that meant we had an apple. So that means I'm going to add 1 to my variable count. Okay? So every time that we reach an apple item, I'm going to add 1 to my counter. So I have a counter and just adding 1 to it every time that I reach an apple. Okay? And after I'm done with this loop, after it is terminated, I'm going to print this variable count, which is the number of apples that I have in this sequence. Okay, let's run and see if we get 2. Okay, here you go. So we sort of replicated this count function. All right, so it does the exact same thing. It counts a specific item that you're looking for. If you want to count banana, for instance, you just simply need to change what you're comparing that item with. Okay, so you're comparing that item with banana. So now if I run it, hopefully we get 1. Here you go. If you want to compare it with orange, you should get 0 because there is no orange in this sequence, right? You see how we are doing it? So that was using a while loop to do that, okay? And it was quite straightforward, but you needed to create many variables to make sure you are traversing over that sequence correctly and things like that. Okay, so now let's do the exact same thing, kind of, we are going to have the exact same goal, but instead of using while loop, we are going to use a for loop because we have a sequence. All right, so with for loop, you need to create a variable yourself. Okay, so I'm going to create a variable here. I'm going to call it item, and I'm going to take different items from a sequence and assign them one by one to this variable. Okay, and my simply my fruit list. Okay, so now I'm saying, okay, for item in fruits, and I'm going to do this line, put it here. I'm going to see if fruits, or let's do something else. I want to make sure you understand what's happening. For in the first step, I want to just say print item. Just print it. I want to see what that item is. All right. Let me comment this whole part so we don't get it twice. So for now, I'm just saying, okay, for item in fruits, print item. I want to see what I'm getting. I guess, my guess is I'm going to see all of the items in that list or in that sequence, each in one line. Okay, because I'm traversing over the items, I'm assigning them one by one to this variable item, and then I'm printing it. Right? Let's see. So I have banana, apple, cherry, and apple again. Okay, so good. I have access to that item already. All right. You remember with while loop, we did so many steps to just access that item. But with 2 lines, I already have access to that item. Because with for, Python knows exactly how many item it is in it, and then it knows how to traverse until it gets to the end of it. Okay, cool. This is awesome. So now what I need to do is I need to have a similar kind of condition and compare my item, which is the actual item in that sequence, and then compare it with what I'm looking for. So I want to compare it with apple, see how many apples I have. Similar to a while loop, we need to have this variable counter to be able to count the number of items. So if your item is apple, you want to add 1 to your count. Okay, done. We should get the exact same output similar to a while loop. So I'm going to print count, and let's go. Here you go. So let's compare them. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines to do that problem, to reach to that goal. And then with for loop, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 2 lines less and much more intuitive. Okay, less variables, simpler to sort of implement. All right, as you go forward, you feel how easier for loops are going to be when you have a sequence.